Hi everyone, thank you so much for your interest in this research. My name's Thomas Lennie and I'm Assistant Professor of Psychology at the American University in Bulgaria. And I would love to take you through some of this research that I've been doing on exploring appraisal dimensions in music. So to start off, it's important to define what is a cognitive appraisal. And very simply, a cognitive appraisal in the psychological literature refers to an individual's evaluation of a stimulus, an event, a situation, and the degree of relevance that stimulus, situation, event has for one's needs, wishes, desires, goals, wants. And cognitive appraisal is a very, very commonly cited component of emotion models, emotional episodes in the wider affective literature. And this is true of music too. But like in the wider affective literature, in music-specific models, there's a huge amount of disagreement about the importance of appraisal in the emotional episode. Some models placing it right at the bottom as a purely mediating mechanism, something that influences other mechanisms in the emotional induction process. Other models placing it much higher up that list as the most common cause of emotion in different senses. The problem we have with music literature generally is that we often explore these appraisals as individual terms. So one example of this might be familiarity. And I'm sure you've all read a music science experiment somewhere where someone wants to control for the degree of familiarity your participants have with the stimulus. And this would be one example of a cognitive appraisal. The problem with focusing on cognitive appraisal in this individual sense is that we don't get to see the interaction of multiple appraisals and the importance of this interaction of multiple appraisals, regardless of whether you want to put appraisal as a theoretically just a mediating mechanism or a very, very important causal mechanism. So this research starts with taking an exploratory approach to the role of multiple appraisal mechanisms in a musically induced emotional episode. It wants or seeks to address the internal validity of certain appraisal dimensions, and it also wants, in the musical context, and it also wants to explore their predictive value. Do they actually add anything to the experimental data, and can we learn anything by looking at appraisal? So how do we go about studying this? Well, initially, I went out and identified as many appraisal terms as I could that were relevant to music, to art, drawing from empirical and theoretical data, and then shifted through these and identified those terms that I felt would be most relevant specifically to the experimental context, which is an online listening experiment. We also went out and identified some stimuli that I felt would capture the widest variety of variation. For this, I used the DEEM dataset. This has pre-existing ratings of valence and arousal, includes 45-second musical excerpts. And I shifted through this database, selecting a variety of genres and identifying pieces that participants really agreed on, so where the standard deviation was very, very low for ratings of valence and arousal, and equally for pieces that varied a lot between participants. The idea being that appraisal might be able to distinguish when and why people find these differ in these elements. Participants using Prolific in an online experiment were then asked to rate these excerpts, 20 excerpts each, which included a very, very high and a very, very low standard deviation vary from each of the genres. And participants were asked to rate these for appraisal dimensions. They were also asked to rate it for core effect, so valence and arousal, and also for the degree of interest that they had in the music. So what did the experiment find? Well, initially, these appraisals were assessed for their internal consistency, the homogeneity of variance, their statistical independence, and once this had been accounted for, this left 10 core appraisal terms that were taken forward for future analysis. The first thing was to run an exploratory factor analysis, and this grouped very, very nicely into 3 core components. These components were named complexity, novelty, and goal congruence. And this explained a reasonable amount of the data, but goal congruence most certainly explained the lion's share of that data, accounting for 36% of the variance. This included terms like individuals' internal standards, the pleasantness, how well they understood the music, how socially normal it was. So following the exploratory factor analysis, I took those latent factors from the analysis and used them as predictors to see if they could be useful predictors for predicting emotional responses to music. One example of that is the model of interest. And all three factors, so novelty, complexity, and goal congruence, were all very, very strong predictors of interest. And that model performed very, very well, explaining just under 60% of the data. And in psychological terms, that's a very, very strong model for psychological factors. Most psychological factors performing much more around the kind of 30% mark. So this model explains a huge amount of the data. And in the plots, what you can see is that I've plotted each individual appraisal from one example, which is the goal congruence factor, and how it contributed to predicting interest. And in each of the cases, you can see that there's a strong linear trend for all the appraisal terms, and that seems relatively consistent across genres too. Of course, if you like to see a little bit more of the data and you'd like to see the linear mixed models explained explicitly and the results, you can follow the QR code presented. And this will take you to a document that lists all those factors, all those linear mixed models and all those tables out fully. So what are some of the key takeaways from this experiment? Well, firstly, we've shown that several appraisals form relevant psychometric terms in a music listening context. Moreover, that they can be really good predictors, particularly in this context for ratings of interest and valence and how individuals might differ on those spectrums. Finally, I think this adds a lot to the wider conversation of art appraisal. So previous work has highlighted things like complexity as really, really important in the discussion of what makes art meaningful. Here we add that actually perhaps we need to expand these terms and start to look at some wider appraisal terms and their interactions as part of the conversation. So where is this going next? Well, we'd like to run a confirmatory analysis to see if we can find these same results again with a new set of participants. And if that is the case, developing an open access tool, something that is easy to use where people can use appraisals and all the analyses are set up for you in a ready to use package. Thank you so much for your attention. Here are some of the references that I've used today. And if you have any questions, please do reach out. There's my Twitter and my email, and you're very happy to find me at the conference too. Thanks for listening.